Hello. So I read a novel recently, which I feel very mixed about. It has a fascinating subject matter. I found aspects of the writing incredibly beautiful and poignant, but it took me quite a while to get into it. I really struggled with this narrative. It's quite a difficult read, but it is also, I think, a rewarding one. So the novel is We Are Green and Trembling by Gabriela Cabezon Camara, who is an Argentinian author, and this is translated from the Spanish by Robin Myers. And at the center of this book is a fictional recreation of a real historical figure who's so interesting and who I had never heard of before. So this individual is Antonio de Arraso. And I don't know if that is how you properly pronounce his names. When I pronounce Spanish names, I like to roll my R's. So Antonio de Arraso was born in the late 1500s and assigned female at birth and raised as a girl, but when he came of age, became an adult, he lived as a man, and he became an explorer, a soldier, and an outlaw throughout the early 1600s, and lived his entire adult life as a man. And he traveled around the world, notably to South America, and we follow his story, and I can't believe I never heard of this historic individual before, and went up and read information about him, which I would really recommend doing before reading this novel, because it really helps to know more about this historical figure before going into reading this book, because I think there is a lot of assumed knowledge in this story. It just plunges you into his life and what is going on. And that can be quite disorientating, especially because the narrative is split up into three distinct parts. So there is kind of what I guess is the present time for him when he is in the jungles of South America, kind of in hiding with two indigenous girls who he has rescued from slavery, as well as a whole bunch of animals. So there's that aspect of the narrative, but there's also a lot of the narrative is made up of letters that he is writing to his aunt back in Spain, the aunt who raised him in a convent. And he is explaining his life to this aunt. And part of why I struggled with this aspect of the narrative is because it is all in italics, and I find it really difficult to read multiple paragraphs in italics, because just my eyes go a bit blurry kind of following that text. So that's part of the challenge of reading that. But then there's also a third aspect of the narrative, which shifts to other colonialists at that time, and colonial actions that are occurring, very violent actions of indigenous people and slaves who are being killed, and there are sacrifices and a lot of chaos and war, and it just plunges you into all of this action. And so I spent the first quite a few chapters in the very beginning of this relatively short book quite disorientated and not really knowing what was going on, but I just kind of went with it because I was so fascinated by the story and this historical figure. And it does eventually come together. I think a kind of both a larger portrait of Antonio de Arraso's life, as well as looking at these larger events from history and colonial history and the machinations and contradictions of it, and gives this new view of this area of the past. And I found some parts of it so poignant, especially his interactions with these two young girls who are very mischievous. They're always, as he's trying to write his letters, they are kind of interjecting. They're chatting with him about many issues to do with faith and God, and the a kind of a Christian conception of the world that they are entirely unfamiliar with, and that they are kind of pointing out the absurdities concerning these aspects of religious doctrine that he is explaining to them, but also how he explores his past and life in these letters to his aunt, not trying to justify himself. He is not at all ashamed about who he is. And I love how there's one line in the book when it says he doesn't need anyone to tell him what he is. He is just what he is, and he completely lives that way, completely owns his identity. And I think it is so bold how he is completely forthright about that, and living the way he wants to. And of course, readers might have questions about, well, if he is living as a soldier, as a sailor, wouldn't people notice that he is biologically female? And there's this one line concerning that, which says, "Perhaps no one sees what is not, even if it in some ways is." And I thought that is such a great riposte to that the questions like that. And so, yeah, what a fascinating figure to read about, but also these three different narratives and how it flips between them. The writing in it is quite dense, quite difficult to understand what is even going on and what is at stake for these characters, although there is so much violence and hardship wrapped into it naturally, because during this colonialist era, there was a massive amount of death and oppression and religious fervor. And it explores all of that by just, yeah, like I said, plunging the reader into all of this experience. So it's quite disorientating reading this book, or at least I had to read it really carefully to understand, or try to understand, what was going on. I'm sure there was a lot about it that I missed, but I did find it really fascinating. Now, I'd read this author's previous novel called The Adventures of China Iron, which I also really admired, but somewhat struggled with as well. So I feel like Camara is an author that I do really admire, and I think that Camara is doing things that no other author is doing, and mining these stories and figures from history to bring them into the present, to show the relevance of their stories and the presence of history, how there can be experiences which we think of as modern, which have always been, and that have been lived throughout history, but also how there are aspects of history which still have great relevancy in the present. So yeah, a really fascinating novel, but yeah, one that I still feel quite mixed about. And there are also some incredibly lush passages about the jungle and the environment, but also Antonio da Rasso, he was not a saint at all. He was a colonialist. He did kill a number of people, and he was an outlaw who was jailed multiple times, had such a dramatic life. And it's so interesting. I'm reading about his life and past that apparently he wrote an autobiography, but this, which was a big bestseller at the time because he had such a dramatic life, but it's somewhat in dispute whether this autobiography was authentic, and so I think the author is playing with this ambiguous biographical detail about this fascinating figure's life. And so, I mean, we'll probably never know for sure entirely all of the facts about his life. And I think he purposefully obscured a lot of his personal history. So a lot of it can't be known, but there is the spirit of this individual which persists and breaks through this story, and that I found so compelling, contemplating this figure from history and the very unique way that Camara presents his life. But still, it is not an easy read. But this also made me think about one of my favorite novels that I read from the past few years, which is also a historical novel called Saltblood that I have just up here on my shelves. Saltblood by Francesca de Torres, which is this fascinating historical story, and also brings to life a figure from history of a girl who was dressed as a man in order to live as a sailor for quite a lot of her life before settling down in a different part of the world and living as a female. And so yeah, how this plays, both of these novels query these issues to do with gender and identity, and but by utilizing, not using, I don't think, but utilizing these fascinating historical figures, I think is so special, and yeah, really interesting historical novels. Now, this is currently shortlisted for the National Book Award for translated literature, and so yeah, and hopefully more people are reading and discovering this book. And if you have read this, I would love to know what you think about it, how, if you were able to come to grips with it, or if you found it too dense and difficult to read, and if you had set it aside, or if you're interested in the challenge of reading this book. I'd love to know if you're interested in trying to read it now, and if you do, please come back and let me know what you think about it. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things. I'll speak to you again soon. Bye bye.